The lack of a smile should have been just another detail Park Min-jae ignored. Another missing garnish on the plate of an invisible chef who prepared his meals in the sterile silence of his estate. But when Pulina Mark failed to hum as she plated the galbi, and the rhythmic sound of her knife against the cutting board stuttered at his entrance, something ancient and protective roared to life inside him. He had burned down rival syndicates for less than the exhaustion he saw weighing down her deep brown eyes. Where did the soul of this meal go? His voice was deadly calm, the same tone he used before signing a death warrant. Pulina's fingers trembled against the edge of her white chef's coat. Her lips parted as if to let out a secret she couldn't afford to tell. It's just... The seasoning is different today, Mr. Park. I'm tired. Min-jae stepped into the warmth of the kitchen, and she instinctively pulled her shoulders inward, a reflexive retreat that ignited a fire in him far hotter than the industrial stoves. For the first time in a decade of maintaining absolute icy control over his territory, Park Min-jae felt the world tilt. "Don't lie to me," he whispered, his calculating eyes locking onto the tightness around her mouth. "Who took your smile?" Pulina had run the kitchen of Min-jae's estate for 6 months without ever truly looking him in the eye. To her, he was a ghost in a crisp white shirt, a presence defined by expensive silk ties, the scent of sandalwood, and a quiet authority that made the very air in the hallways feel heavy. She knew the rules of the house. The ingredients must be fresh, the spice levels must be precise, and she was to remain a phantom behind the swinging kitchen doors. Quiet dignity was Pulina's armor. Years of navigating a world that demanded more than she had to give had taught her how to find sanctuary in the steam and the sizzle. She moved with a grace that left the air undisturbed, perfecting the art of being essential yet unnoticed. Today that armor was cracked. She had tried to mask the worry with a taller chef's hat and a focus on her work, but the shadow of the loan shark's visit this morning followed her into the kitchen. The interest had doubled. Her family was a phone call away from a threat she couldn't cook her way out of. The rent was due, the debt was mounting, and for the first time the kitchen didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage. She didn't realize that in the silence of his empire, her joy had been the only thing Min-jae actually listened to. And now that it was gone, he was ready to declare war to find it. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of a clock. Pulina stood at the marble island, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, but the spark was gone. Her movements were mechanical, lacking the fluid grace that usually defined her work. She didn't look up when the heavy oak door creaked open, though she felt the temperature in the room drop as Park Min-jae entered. He didn't speak at first. He simply sat at the small high-top table in the corner where he always took his late-night meals. Pulina placed the plate of galbi jim before him. The braised short ribs were glazed to perfection, the aroma of soy, ginger, and sesame rising in a fragrant cloud. Usually, this was the moment she would offer a small, tired smile, a professional courtesy that had, over time, become the highlight of his day. Tonight, she simply folded her hands in front of her apron and stared at a spot just above his left shoulder. Min-jae picked up his chopsticks, his expression unreadable. He took a single bite, chewed slowly, and then set the utensils down with a sharp metallic click. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "It is bitter," he said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to crawl up Pulina's spine. She blinked, her eyes finally meeting him. "Bitter. I followed the recipe exactly, Mr. Park. The Asian pears were ripe, the sugar. The ingredients are correct, Pulina. The execution is flawless." He stood up, his tall frame casting a long, intimidating shadow over her. He moved closer, stopping only when he was inches away, invading the space she usually kept guarded. "But the salt is bitter. It tastes of sweat and old tears. It tastes like a woman who has spent her afternoon looking over her shoulder instead of at the stove." Pulina's breath hitched. She tried to maintain her composure, but the quiet dignity she wore like a shield was beginning to crumble. Her expressive eyes darted to the window, then back to the immaculate white of his shirt. "I'm just tired," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The heat in the kitchen today." Min-jae reached out, his pale, steady hand stopping just short of touching her chin. He didn't need to touch her to make her feel the weight of his attention. You have been tired before. This is different. Your hands are shaking, and the tightness in your jaw is a language I know well. It is the look of someone waiting for a blow to land. He stepped even closer, his calculating eyes searching her face for the truth she was trying so desperately to hide. I pay for your talent, yes, but I have come to rely on your peace. Tell me who has disturbed it. Tell me why you have stopped smiling, or I will find the reason myself. And I promise you, my methods of discovery are far less gentle than a conversation. Paulina looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, the fear of her past was eclipsed by the terrifying, protective intensity of the man standing before her. The silence that followed Min Jae's threat was suffocating. Paulina felt the heat of the industrial ovens behind her, but it did nothing to melt the ice settling in her chest. She looked down at her hands, the skin dusted with flour and scarred by years of kitchen burns, marks of a woman who had always worked for her survival. It's a ghost, Mr. Park, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the vent hood. A ghost named Elias. Min Jae didn't blink. He stood perfectly still, his refined features like a marble statue in the dim kitchen light. Ghosts don't cause the hands of a master chef to shake. Men do. Paulina took a shuddering breath, the words tumbling out before her pride could catch them. He's a loan shark from back home. Years ago, when my mother was sick and the hospital wouldn't see her without a deposit, I was desperate. I took a small amount. I thought I could outrun it, outwork it. I moved here, I changed my name, I found this sanctuary with you. She looked up, her expressive eyes filling with a restrained vulnerability. But he found me this morning at the market. The interest. It's grown into a monster I don't recognize. He said if I don't pay the full balance by the weekend, he'll find my sister next. Min Jae's jaw tightened, a subtle shift that signaled a predatory shift in his demeanor. How much? It doesn't matter, Paulina said, a flash of her quiet dignity returning. It's more than I'll make in 3 years. I can't let you get involved in this. This is my burden, my mistake. I've spent my life being invisible so I could be safe. If I pull you into this, there's no going back to the way things were. Min Jae stepped even closer, his scent of sandalwood and cold ozone wrapping around her. He reached out, his fingers finally brushing the edge of her white chef's hat, a gesture that was surprisingly tender yet terrifyingly possessive. You think you are protecting me from your world? He asked, his voice a low, dangerous silk. You are working in a house built on blood, Paulina. You chose this kitchen because you thought it was a hiding place, but you were wrong. It is a fortress. He tilted his head, his sharp eyes missing nothing, not the tightness in her brow or the way she bit her lip to keep it from trembling. This Elias. He made a fatal error. He looked at what was mine and thought he saw a debt. He did not realize that by taking your smile, he was stealing from me. Mr. Park, please. Go home, Paulina, he interrupted, his tone returning to that of a man used to absolute obedience. Cook for your family. Bleep. The debt is no longer yours. It has been transferred to a man who knows exactly how to settle accounts. As she turned to leave, her heart hammering against her ribs, she realized the shadow of the lone shark had been replaced by a much larger, darker shadow, one that was currently watching her with the gaze of a king preparing for a crusade. The next evening, the kitchen was silent, but the air felt charged, as if a storm were gathering just beyond the horizon. Paulina had prepared a simple meal of doenjang, the hearty soybean paste stew bubbling softly on the stove. She kept her head down, her movements stiff as she ladled the broth into a stone bowl. She had expected Min Jae to take his seat in the corner as he always did, but when she turned to serve him, she found him standing by the large, formal dining table in the center of the room. Set another place, he said. His voice wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. Paulina paused, the heavy bowl warm in her hands. Mr. Park, the guests aren't due until. There are no guests tonight, Paulina. Just us. He pulled out the heavy velvet-cushioned chair at the head of the table and gestured to the seat directly to his right. Sit. The quiet dignity she usually wore felt like a thin veil. She hesitated, her pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. "I am the chef, sir. I eat in the kitchen after the service." Min-jae's eyes, usually as cold and unreadable as polished flint, softened with a flicker of something that looked dangerously like respect. "Tonight you are not the help. You are a woman who is carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and I will not have you carry it while standing." Reluctantly, Paulina placed the stew on the table and sank into the chair. The transition from the stainless steel world of the kitchen line to the opulence of the dining table felt like crossing a border into a foreign land. She felt small, her white chef's coat stark against the dark, expensive wood. Min-jae didn't eat immediately. He poured her a glass of water, his pale, steady hand moving with a precision that was almost hypnotic. "In my culture," he began softly, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from the bowls, "sharing a meal is a pact. Means your hunger is my hunger. Your enemies are my enemies." Paulina looked at him, the restrained vulnerability in her eyes giving way to a sudden, sharp fear. "I didn't ask for a pact, Mr. Park. I just wanted to work." "You wanted to be invisible," he corrected, his voice dropping to a low, intimate silk. "But I have been watching you for 6 months. I have tasted your joy in the salt and your sorrow in the spice. You have fed my soul, Paulina. It is only fair that I protect yours." He picked up his spoon and waited until she did the same. As they ate in a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the weight of an unspoken promise, the shift occurred. The invisible line between master and servant blurred. Paulina felt the shadows in the kitchen receding, replaced by the terrifying solid warmth of the man sitting beside her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a woman running. She felt like a woman being found. While Paulina attempted to find sleep in the safety of the estate staff wing, Park Min-jae returned to the cold sanctuary of his office. The room was a temple of minimalist power, glass, steel, and shadows. He sat behind his desk, not to review the ledgers of his shipping empire, but to dismantle the life of a man named Elias. He didn't raise his voice when he summoned his head of security, Kim. He didn't have to. The mere set of Min-jae's jaw communicated a level of violence that made the air in the room feel thin. "Find him," Min-jae commanded, tossing a grainy screenshot from the kitchen's exterior security feed across the desk. It showed a man in a cheap leather jacket leaning too close to Paulina at the morning market. "Elias. He thinks he owns a debt. I want to know every cent he has ever extorted, every hand he has laid on those who couldn't fight back, and exactly where he breathes at this moment." As Kim withdrew, Min-jae leaned back, his calculating eyes fixed on the city lights of Los Angeles. 4 hours. He sifted through the digital ghost of Paulina's past that his team unearthed. He saw the medical bills from Georgia, the predatory interest rates that had turned a few $1,000s into a life sentence of fear. He saw the trail of invisibility she had left behind, changing zip codes, working under-the-table jobs, and the quiet dignity of a woman who had sacrificed every luxury to keep her sister in school and her mother's memory honored. The deeper he dug, the more his composed appearance began to fracture. He had built his world on the principle of transaction, but what had happened to Paulina was not business. It was a slow, systematic strangling of a beautiful soul. By 3 a.m., a file sat on his desk detailing Elias's operation, a small-time parasite feeding on the desperation of the local community. To Min-jae, Elias was an insect, but to Paulina, he was a god of terror. Min-jae stood, adjusting his black tie with clinical precision in the reflection of the window. He felt a strange, foreign ache in his chest, a mixture of fury and a profound, aching need to provide a sanctuary that no ghost could enter. He had spent 15 years perfecting the art of being unreadable, but as he looked at the photo of Paulina's tired, expressive eyes, he realized he was no longer just a boss or a protector. He was a man who had found something worth more than his empire, and he was about to show the underworld exactly what happened when someone touched his peace. "The debt isn't just settled, Kim," Min-jae said into his phone as he headed for the door. "It's erased. Start with his storefronts. Leave nothing but the ash." The morning sun had barely begun to burn through the Los Angeles fog when Paulina stepped past the iron gates of the Park estate to head to the local market. She had tried to convince herself that the dinner with Min Jae had changed everything, but the cold reality of her debt still sat like lead in her stomach. She was only 2 blocks away when a black sedan screeched to a halt beside her, the smell of burning rubber cutting through the crisp morning air. Elias stepped out, his cheap leather jacket creaking, a predatory smirk twisted across his face. He didn't look like a ghost today. He looked like a monster. "Running to your fancy job won't hide the numbers, Paulina," he sneered, closing the distance until she could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. He reached out, his hand wrapping roughly around her forearm, his fingers digging into the soft skin just below the sleeve of her coat. "I told you about the weekend. You think that pretty face is going to save you when I come for your sister?" Paulina's quiet dignity finally broke. A small, choked sound of terror escaped her lips as she tried to pull away. "I'm getting the money, Elias. Please just stay away from her." "I don't think you're hearing me," he hissed, his grip tightening until her bones felt like they might snap. "She heard you perfectly." The voice was like a blade of ice cutting through the humid morning. Elias spun around, still holding Paulina's arm, to find Park Min-jae standing 10 feet away. He wasn't surrounded by guards. He didn't need them. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his immaculate charcoal trousers, his white dress shirt blindingly bright in the sun. His expression was calm, serious, and utterly terrifying. "And who the hell are you?" Elias barked, though the tremor in his knees betrayed him. Min-jae didn't answer the man. His eyes, those soft yet calculating eyes, were fixed entirely on Paulina's arm. "Let her go," he said. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, vibrational command that seemed to vibrate the very pavement beneath them. Elias, fueled by a fatal cocktail of ego and ignorance, tightened his grip. "This is business, pal. She owes." In a blur of motion that Paulina's eyes could barely track, Min-jae was there. He didn't punch. He simply took hold of Elias's wrist with a strength that was inhumanly precise. There was a sickening pop, and Elias shrieked, releasing Paulina as he fell to his knees. Min-jae stepped between them, shielding Paulina with his body. He looked down at the whimpering man as if he were a stain on an otherwise perfect rug. "You made a mistake," Min-jae whispered, his voice a deadly silk. "You brought your filth to my gates. You touched what is mine." He turned slightly, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second as it landed on Paulina's trembling form. "Go back to the house, Paulina. Make the coffee. Dark the way I like it. Mr. Park." She gasped, her expressive eyes wide with a mix of shock and dawning realization. "Go," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "From this moment on, this man, this debt, is no longer your burden. It is my concern. And I assure you, I handle my concerns with permanent solutions." As Paulina retreated toward the gates, she didn't look back, but she heard the sound of the sedan's doors opening and the heavy, synchronized footsteps of Min-jae's men arriving to finish what their master had started. The war hadn't just begun. For Elias, it was already over. The following 3 days were the loudest silences Paulina had ever experienced. The lone shark had vanished as if he had never existed, wiped clean from the streets of the city. There were no more predatory phone calls, no shadows lingering at the market, and no heavy boots following her home. But in their place was a new, more profound terror, the realization of what Park Min-jae truly was. Every time he entered the kitchen, Paulina saw not just the man who had shared her stew, but the man who had broken a wrist with the casual indifference of someone snapping a dry twig. His white shirts remained immaculate, but to her eyes, they seemed stained by the invisible weight of his world. She realized that by trading her debt to Elias for the protection of Min-jae, she hadn't found freedom. She had simply moved into a golden cage guarded by a dragon. "I can't stay," she whispered to the empty kitchen, her tears blurring the reflection in a stainless steel bowl. "I'm trading one monster for a king of monsters." She began to pack in the dead of night. Her movements were frantic, the quiet dignity she usually maintained replaced by a raw, desperate survival instinct. She stuffed her chef's whites into a duffel bag alongside her sister's school papers. She didn't want Zara to grow up in the shadow of a man whose business was blood, no matter how softly he spoke or how deeply he looked into Paulina's eyes. She was halfway to the service entrance when the lights in the hallway flickered on, illuminating the path with a clinical, unforgiving brightness. Min-jae was leaning against the far wall, his arms crossed over a black silk vest, his dark hair perfectly styled even at 2 in the morning. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly, devastatingly disappointed. "The gates are unlocked, Paulina," he said, his voice a low, melodic sorrow. "I don't keep prisoners." Paulina froze, her fingers white-knuckled around the handle of her bag. "I saw what you did," she gasped, her expressive eyes wide with fear. "I saw the way you looked at him, like he wasn't even a man. How can I feel safe knowing you have that much darkness in you?" Min-jae stepped into her space, not to stop her, but to force her to see him. "I used that darkness to buy you the light. You think your peace was free. It was paid for by the only currency people like Elias understand." He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, but he didn't touch her. "You want to protect your family from my world. I understand that. But who will protect you from the next Elias when I am gone?" "I'll figure it out," she lied, her voice trembling. "No, you won't," he whispered. "You'll hide. You'll be invisible again. And you'll forget how it felt to smile." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. The path to the street was clear, but as Paulina looked at the dark, cold world outside and then back at the man who had declared war for her seasoning, the price of peace felt heavier than any debt she had ever owed. She didn't leave, but she didn't drop her bag either. They stood on the threshold of 2 worlds, neither of them willing to blink first. In the end, Paulina had not stepped through the gates, but she had retreated into the furthest corner of the estate's staff quarters, a self-imposed exile that felt like a slow starvation of the soul. For 5 days, she did not enter the kitchen. She did not touch a knife, she did not smell the steam of a simmering broth, and she did not see the man who had shattered her world to save it. She told herself she was protecting her heart, but as the hours bled into days, the silence of her room felt less like safety and more like a void. In the main house, the consequence of her absence was visceral. Park Min-jae did not hire a replacement. He did not order from the city's finest restaurants or allow his staff to prepare a substitute. He simply stopped eating. The estate became a tomb of cold marble and echoing footsteps. Kim, his head of security, watched with growing concern as his master sat at the head of the empty dining table every night, staring at the spot where Paulina had sat just a week before. Min-jae's clean-cut appearance remained immaculate. His white shirts crisp and his tie perfectly knotted, but his pale skin took on a hollowing translucence. His eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, grew dark with a different kind of hunger, one that no amount of food could satisfy. On the 5th night, Paulina found herself standing in front of her small vanity, looking at the expressive eyes she had spent a lifetime trying to dull. She looked at her hands, which felt restless and heavy without the weight of a whisk or a pan. She realized then that her quiet dignity wasn't found in her invisibility, but in the joy she gave others through her craft. By hiding from Min-jae's darkness, she had extinguished her own light. She missed the way he listened to the flavor of her salt. She missed the terrifyingly steady weight of his gaze. She was starving for the only man who had ever truly looked at her and seen a person instead of a servant. Driven by a sudden, frantic need, she left her room and hurried through the darkened corridors to the kitchen. She expected it to be empty, but as she pushed open the swinging doors, she saw him. Min-jae was sitting in the dark at the small kitchen table, a single glass of water before him. He looked up, and for a split second, the mask of the Mafia boss slipped, revealing a man who was utterly, completely famished. "The kitchen is cold, Paulina," he whispered, his voice raspy from days of disuse. "I'm here to light the stoves, Mr. Park," she replied, her voice steady for the first time since the war began. As she reached for her apron, she realized they were both survivors of a different kind of famine, and the only thing that could feed them now was the presence of the other. The stovetops were lit, and the kitchen had returned to a low simmer, but the physical walls of the estate still felt like a barrier Paulina couldn't fully breach. After the 5 days of hunger, she had returned home to her small apartment to process the shift in the air. She sat in her cramped living room, the flickering streetlights outside casting long shadows across her worn furniture, wondering if she could truly bridge the gap between her world of spice and his world of steel. A soft, rhythmic knock at her door startled her. It wasn't the aggressive pound of a debt collector or the frantic beat of a panicked neighbor. It was a deliberate, controlled sound. When she opened the door, Park Min-jae stood in the dim hallway. He looked strikingly out of place in the modest apartment building. His immaculate white shirt and black tie a sharp contrast to the peeling wallpaper and the scent of laundry detergent. "You left your apron," he said, though his hands were empty. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his calculating eyes taking in the photos of her sister and the small comforts she had scraped together to make this place a home. "I needed space to think, Mr. Park," Pulina said, her voice carrying that familiar restrained vulnerability. "Your world. It's built on things I can't wrap my head around. I'm a chef. Create things. I won't destroy them." Min-jae turned to face her, his composure so absolute it was almost haunting. "You think I don't know the difference? You think I don't see the blood on my own hands every time I look at the clarity in your eyes?" He stepped closer, his presence filling the small room until Pulina felt her back press against the wall. "I have spent 15 years being exactly what the underworld required me to be. Cold, calculating, unmovable." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that made her breath hitch. "But when I am near you, the silence isn't cold anymore. It's peaceful. When I see you smile, I remember that there is a version of me that hasn't been written in ink and lead." "I can't change who you are," Pulina whispered. "No," he replied, his voice a low, melodic vow. "But you can change who I want to be. I am not asking you to join my world, Pulina. I'm asking you to let me build a new one around you. I will be the man you make me want to be, the one who protects the light instead of just living in the shadows." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. In the quiet of her apartment, the Mafia boss vanished, leaving only a man who was finally ready to lay down his arms for a woman who had taught him how to taste life again. Pulina closed her eyes, the fear of the unknown finally giving way to the warmth of his promise. 3 years later, the air in the heart of the city was no longer thick with the scent of ozone and fear, but with the rich, intoxicating aroma of roasted garlic, charred peppers, and slow-braised short ribs. The glass storefront of the Soul's table glowed like a jewel against the twilight, its name etched in gold script that caught the fading sun. Inside, the rhythmic percussion of a busy kitchen was a symphony of success, but tonight, the head chef wasn't hiding behind the swinging doors. Pulina stood in the center of the dining room, her deep brown skin radiant under the warm amber lights. She wore a custom-tailored white chef's coat, the buttons polished and her posture radiating a quiet dignity that was no longer a shield, but a throne. She moved between tables with a grace that didn't seek to avoid the air, but to claim it. When she laughed at a guest's compliment, the sound was full, bright, and frequent, the sound of a woman who had forgotten how to be invisible. In the shadows of a corner booth, Park Min-jae sat alone, though he was never truly solitary. His clean-cut appearance remained as sharp as ever, but the icy discipline of his gaze had thawed into something profoundly soft as he watched his wife. He had made good on his promise. The shipping ledgers had been purged of their darker entries, and the empire he now oversaw was built on legitimate steel and the flourishing success of Pulina's culinary vision. He was no longer a king of monsters, but a man who had traded his throne for a seat at her table. Pulina felt his gaze and turned, her expressive eyes locking onto his across the crowded room. There was no flinch, no reflexive retreat. Instead, she walked toward him, the restrained vulnerability of her past replaced by a terrifyingly beautiful confidence. She set a small plate before him, a perfect recreation of the Galbi gym from the night their war had begun. Min-jae took a bite, his calculating eyes closing as he savored the flavor. "The salt?" she asked, a playful tilt to her head. Min-jae reached out, taking her hand and kissing the palm, his touch lingering in a public declaration of devotion. "It tastes like home," he whispered, his voice a low, melodic vow. It tastes like a woman who is finally perfectly seen. Pulina leaned down, her lips brushing his forehead as the city hummed outside. In a world that had once tried to erase her, she had found the perfect recipe. A life where her joy was the main ingredient, and the man who had fought a war for her smile was the one who got to cherish it forever. She wasn't just a chef or a survivor anymore. She was loved, she was safe, and she was home.